Welcome to this lecture on language. We're going to talk about these things. Well, I might win a Nobel Prize for Literature for that one, but we are going to talk about language. Hey, today's lecture is going to be obviously on language. I'm not going to throw the pages around like I did at the introduction, but I thought I'd give you a bit of a clue. The first one I'm going to talk about is dialogue. The dialogue in the novel is extremely impressive. Not only is there no speech marks, and you need to think about why he does that, he gets back to the barest essential style of dialogue. There's no explanatory narration, and the sentences are very clear, concise and simple. That's because he's talking not only to a child, but a child who hasn't had a whole lot of education. And I think he does the dialogue so well and captures their relationship and the essence of their relationship. Description. We've already sort of looked at description previously in all the different lectures, and I've read lots of quotes from that, and you can sort of get an idea of how graphic the description is, especially the horror scenes. And I think if you go over those, the descriptions of places and the descriptions of the horror scenes, it's the horror scenes that stick in our mind. The descriptions alienate us from the world, but I think it's the graphic horror scenes that drag us in. The next one, after description, is symbols. The symbols, obviously, I've talked about the road, and if we go back to setting, I talk about the road extensively. Here, the road is not a symbol of freedom. Here, it's a symbol of movement, and movement for them is hope. There is no sense of freedom necessarily in the novel. So what are some of the other symbols in the novel other than the road? We have the Coke can. The Coke can, extremely important. It represents a past world, the opposite sort of thing of the Coke ads, life ads that we see now. There's no life added here. Certainly the boy does enjoy it, but it represents that a symbol of something that we think is going to be eternal. Coke's been there forever and we think it will go on forever, but it's the last can of Coke in the world, and the boy sits down and enjoys it. I think that's a wonderful symbol. The next symbol we're going to look at are serpents. And serpents, or snakes, are historically evil, representing the sin and the devil. And in the text, they're targets of pointless violence, and we see that representation. It's that lashing out against evil, or symbols of evil, because it's the symbols of evil that have caused this destruction of the world. And we know basically and logically that's not true, but these things happen. The next one we need to look at is children and what children represent in the novel. Certainly, as in most texts, children represent innocence and hope here, but it's very ephemeral, isn't it? We see children and then they're gone. And the boy is the only one who survives until the end of the novel when he goes off with the other children. And I think it's extremely important that we realise that children are so precious. That's why they've become almost nearly a precious commodity, far worth more than anything else on the whole planet. But they are very, very ephemeral. And we need to think, does this world offer them anything? I don't think necessarily that it does, except a certain sense of hope. Another symbol that we can look at in the novel as a part of the language techniques is the flare pistol. Now we know that the flare pistol exemplifies how completely alone they are in that first scene of the novel. Of course, later it's used as a weapon. But in the first scene when he shoots it into the air, he says, who's going to see it? In other words, the signal's pointless, and they say, God. Perhaps they're the only people left to see it. And that's a really sad moment in the text. So, is there any hope in the novel? And I think we see that the idea of the trout and the natural stream is extremely important later on. The trout's a symbol of nature in a world that there is no nature, and a world that's been lost. And if you look on page 42 and pages 306 and 307, you'll see that the trout on those pages is represented as something sort of nearly mystical, a memory, a dream or whatever. But there's some sense that maybe somewhere that could still be the case, it still could be alive. You need to decide for yourself, does it offer hope? Where is the hope and what happens? Also, what else are we looking at here? The final one that I'd like to look at is dreams. And dreams are extremely significant in the text as they're a reflection of the fears that we have. We can look at the idea of his childhood dreams versus the monsters he dreams about now. They certainly add confusion and dislocation to the novel, and confusion and dislocation to that character. Memories, for example, in the dreams are not helpful in this world. And he says very clearly, you forget a lot you want to remember, and you remember what you want to forget. And I think that's a very telling quote. The language in the novel is a simple novel, but there's also some very archaic language used in it. And you need to note where he does that and why he does that and those archaic terms. And I've given you examples in the notes. Because I'd like to read you one quote to talk about some of the basic language techniques. And this quote comes from the Strange Horizons review of the text, where Victoria Hall begins to analyse. And she says, McCarthy conjures their continued existence as a catalogue of desperately repetitive circumstance. Starvation to plenty to starvation, from desperation to hope, safety to danger, and back again. The reader accompanies them viscerally in the sense that they too experience a short, episodic drudgery, though hardly as unpleasant. The narrative has no chapter breaks, only short paragraph capsules. There is no respite, apart from the inevitable end, nor is there any real progression. Like the man, the reader never gets anywhere. There is nowhere to go. What there is instead is loss and trembling and love precisely expressed. McCarthy is a commanding writer with a fine control of his style and a syntax that is always careful in its eccentricity. The Road is at once baroque with an arabesque and stark with Romanesque lines, pure and clean, rich and dense. It is undeniably powerful. And I'd like to end that lecture on language right there. I think that quote sums up a lot, and the links to the quote are always in the notes and things like that. So if you want to follow that up, you can. Language is extremely important in this text for conveying emotion because it's the relationship between the father and son that we really engage with when we read. I think if you start your analysis with that as your focus, you'll do very well for yourself. I'm Bruce Pattinson from Total Education Centre. That's the final lecture in this series on the road. We really hope you've enjoyed this series. If you do, give us a like. If you have any questions, certainly ask us. That's all for now. Good night. Thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Bruce Pattinson from Total Education Centre, and we really hope you enjoyed that lecture on the road. Don't forget to visit us at totaleducation.com.au for all your educational needs and some other teacher notes and student notes on the road and many other titles. We also hope you learn to succeed. That's our motto, and we know you can.